Hey guys, it's Hannah, and today I'm coming to you with my January and February wrap-up. So the reason I'm combining these two wrap-ups is because I actually didn't have time to film a wrap-up in January, and then in February I ended up reading a total of 2 books, and I don't think that's enough to really film a wrap-up, so I decided that I would just put the two together because in January I actually read 14 books, and it was quite a lot, so there's quite a stark contrast between the amount of books I read these past 2 months. But nonetheless, I'm still on track with my Goodreads goal and everything, so I'm pretty pleased with the amount that I've read at the very beginning of this year. So without any further ado, I have 16 books to tell you guys about today, and let's just get into them. So the first book that I read in January, and actually the very first book I read this year, is Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. This is a very, very popular book, and I am probably like the last person to read it. But if you don't know, Fangirl is a YA contemporary about this girl named Kath in her first year at university, and she is a very reserved and introverted, shy type of person who very much likes to keep to herself, and in her free time, Kath likes to write fanfiction about 2 of her favorite characters, Simon and Baz. And the story is really about her trying to deal with the struggles of being a freshman in college, as well as dealing with things in her personal life and her love life and with herself as well. It's very much a coming of age story and kind of a finding yourself type of story, and overall I really did enjoy it. I had a lot of high expectations and a lot of hype going into this book because so many people love this book so much. I'm not the biggest fan of YA contemporary, so it takes a lot for a contemporary to make me fall completely in love with it. And while I didn't fall head over heels in love with this one, I would definitely put it on my list of favorite contemporaries I've ever read. I ended up reading this one not only because so many people were recommending it to me, but also because I read Carry On by Rainbow Rowell last year, which is like the kind of companion novel to this. It's basically Rainbow Rowell's version of the fanfiction that Kath writes about in here, and I loved Carry On so much, and so everyone was telling me that I also had to read Fangirl, so that's the main reason that I really picked this one up. I personally liked Carry On better than I liked Fangirl, but I enjoyed both of them, and I think that they're both really complimentary, and I think they just tell a really nice story. I liked the writing in here, I liked the characters, I thought they were all really unique and very different from a lot of characters that I've read about before in YA contemporaries, and overall it was just very enjoyable for me. And I ended up giving this one a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read in January was Ivory and Bone by Julie Eschbau. This is a YA prehistoric kind of historical fiction fantasy retelling of Pride and Prejudice. That's like a lot in there, but that's kind of the best way that I can encompass this book. It takes place in prehistoric times, and we follow around these 2 different clans of people, and it's supposed to have elements of Pride and Prejudice to it, of kind of like the clash of these 2 different clans, which is supposed to be like the clash of Darcy and Elizabeth with like the 2 different classes. And overall, I didn't enjoy this book almost at all. It wasn't necessarily bad in my opinion, it just wasn't very interesting. This one was just kind of boring for me, which is not usually a critique I have of books. Either there's like some major reason I didn't like the book, or I really enjoy the story, or at least semi-enjoy the story, but I just didn't enjoy anything about this. The one thing that I thought was kind of cool was the writing style. It's written in second person, so that was very interesting and very unique compared to a lot of the other books that I've read, but overall it wasn't enough to make me enjoy the whole story. I just did not really care about these characters. There was nothing that was really compelling about them to me. The world itself, I found actually a lot of inaccuracies. I'm not like a historian or an archaeologist or an anthropologist, so I don't know everything that has to do with the time period that she was writing about, but while I was reading this book, I was simultaneously taking an anthropology course, and we were actually learning about some of the things that she was talking about in this book in terms of setting and some of the plants and animals that were alive during that time, and I found a lot of inaccuracies, and it just like wasn't 100% correct. And it's not that that bothered me all that much, it just didn't help me in any sort of way or compel me to like the story more. But yeah, overall just not a great book for me. I wouldn't recommend it because I personally didn't enjoy it, but if the premise sounds interesting to you, then I definitely say go for it and give it a try if it's something that you think you might be interested in. But overall, I think I ended up giving it a 2 out of 5 stars. The next books that I read in January are actually comics, and I read 8 of these comics. So this makes up a good majority of the 14 books I read in January, but I read the first 8 comics in the Avatar: The Last Airbender comic series. If you didn't know this about about me, Avatar: The Last Airbender is my all-time favorite TV show. It is my life. It is everything to me. If you haven't watched this show, please go watch it. I don't even know how many times I've said this in my videos now, but seriously, go watch it. It'll change your life. And I had never read the comics before, and there are so many of them now, and I decided that this year I would finally pick them up and see what they're all about, and I'm really, really glad that I did because I'm enjoying them so, so much. I was really worried that I wouldn't enjoy them or that they would ruin the original story for me, but I was completely wrong, and I'm so happy that I was. While I don't like the comics as much as I like the original TV show, I do think that there are aspects of them that really do contribute to the original story and just enhance it even more. But yeah, I absolutely loved them, and I gave each of them around 4 to 5 stars. Some of them were 5 stars, some of them were 4 stars, but all of them have been so great so far, and I cannot wait to finish them all off. The next book that I read in January was Passenger by Alexandra Bracken. This is a YA fantasy-ish novel that is a time travel novel, and that's what really drew me into it. I haven't read very many time travel books before, so I thought that this premise sounded really interesting, and I actually listened to this one on audiobook while I was in a plane, and it was just such a good audiobook and such a fun, enjoyable read, and something to just get completely lost in. It's the perfect escapism book in my opinion, just because there's so much depth to the story and it's not too complicated where you'll get like lost, but it's enough to just get you invested and make you fall in love with these characters and the plot and everything. So for that reason, I really enjoyed this. It follows the story of this girl named Etta who is a violinist, and she is about to go and perform on stage for a very important concert. But then she ends up finding out that her family is part of some whole other thing that allows her to time travel. So Etta ends up time traveling to the 1700s, I believe, and she meets a boy named Nicholas. And I don't want to say too much more about the plot because I feel like it'll give away spoilers, but overall this one took me completely by surprise. So yeah, I was not expecting to love this one as much as I did, but I'm so happy that I picked it up because it got me through a really difficult time, and I now have very good memories associated with it. So I'm really, really happy that I read this one, and I cannot wait to read the sequel. And I ended up giving this one a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read in January is a poetry book, and that is Lacebone Beast by N.L. Schoenpool. I was sent this book by the publisher, and I've already done a review for it on Goodreads if you would like to go and check that out. I'll leave it linked down below. But this book took me completely by surprise because it was so, so beautiful and so incredibly touching and heartwarming, and I was not expecting to fall in love with it as much as I did. And I just cannot believe what a gem this one was because it just came out of nowhere. Her poetry deals with self-confidence and self-discovery and grief and a lot of very hard-hitting issues, but it does so in a very fantastical and magical way. Honestly, reading this kind of felt like a fantasy novel, which is so rare to find, I think, in poetry, because obviously poetry is poetic and it's usually lyrical and beautifully written. I also really like simplistic poetry, which this one is, but there's also this whimsical atmosphere to her writing style that makes this feel like a fantasy. And I don't know how else to explain that, like you have to read it to understand, but it's just so good and I cannot recommend this enough. So yeah, if you're looking for a new poetry collection to try out, I highly, highly recommend this one. It's so fantastic and you will not be disappointed if you're into contemporary poetry. And I ended up giving this one a 5 out of 5 stars. The next 2 books I read in January were A Darker Shade of Magic and A Gathering of Shadows by V.E. Schwab. This is the first and second book in the Darker Shade of Magic trilogy by V.E. Schwab, and the third book is now out, which I am currently reading. I won't spend too much time talking about these books here because I actually have a review for both of them up on my channel already, so I'll leave them linked on the screen as well as down below if you'd like to hear more of my thoughts. But essentially, this is an adult fantasy series that takes place in 4 parallel versions of London. So we have Red London, Black London, White London, and Grey London, and our main character Kel is a magician who has the ability to travel between these 4 parallel versions of London. It has instantly become one of my all-time favorite series. I love these books so, so much, and like I said, I'm currently reading the finale of the series, A Conjuring of Light, and I'm loving that one too, but I just don't want it to end. I also have an interview with Victoria Schwab up on my channel as well, so I'll leave that linked on the screen as well as down below if you'd like to go watch that interview. It was so much fun to film. She's truly one of my all-time favorite authors, so it was an actual dream come true for me, and I'm so grateful that I got to have that experience. experience. But yeah, I love these books so much. I gave the first one 4 out of 5 stars and the second one 5 out of 5 stars, and I could not recommend them more. They're such a well-developed fantasy series that is not too complicated or confusing, and this is truly the one series I've ever read that has made me feel the closest to the way that I feel when I'm reading Harry Potter. And if that doesn't tell you how much I love these books, I don't know what else will. They're just so good and I can't recommend them enough. So please, if you haven't started this series yet, I highly, highly recommend that you do. So now finally, moving on to the 2 books that I read in February. The first one was Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. I read this as part of the Ostentatious Book Club, which was started by Zoe from Read by Zoe, and myself, Zoe, Natasha from Tashopolis, and Maureen from Maureen Kiwi all did a live show on this book as well. So I'll leave the live show linked in the description box if you'd like to hear all of us discussing this book. But this was my last Jane Austen novel, and now I've officially read every single one of her novels, and I have to say, this was actually my favorite one. Pride and Prejudice was my favorite Jane Austen book for the longest time, and then Emma became a very close second. But Sense and Sensibility has to be my favorite one of them all because this one was just so good. It follows the story of these 2 sisters and the relationships that they have, but mostly it's focused on their relationship, and both of them grow from one another, and it's just such a beautiful thing to see. And Austen's writing, as always, is beautiful, but there's just so much depth to these characters that she adds in here and so much commentary that is made, and it just became my favorite one instantly. It was just the most enjoyable to read, and the story was the most relatable for me, and I'm just so happy that I've read this one now and I can truly say that it's my favorite one because it was just so good, and I can't believe it's just been sitting on my shelf for so long and I'd never picked it up, and now I'm happy that I finally finished it and I can say how much I really love it. And of course I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars. And finally, the very last book that I read in February was a reread for me, and that was City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. So I've mentioned a few times on some of my social media lately that I've been wanting to reread some of my old favorites just to look at them from a new perspective, and that's why I decided to reread the Mortal Instruments series, because I think it's been like 6 or 7 years since I first read these books, and so I thought that now was a good time to pick them up again and see what 20-year-old me thinks of these versus 13 or 12-year-old me. Back when I first read these, I think I read this like 6 or 7 times. I've reread it many, many times, but I haven't read it in like 6 years, like I mentioned. So from my perspective now, I have a very different outlook on life and on books, and just like the way that I read is completely different. So it's just been really interesting going back through a story that was such an important part of my reading life and seeing how much I've changed as a person. I will say that I didn't enjoy reading this one as much as I did the first time around when I was like 12 years old, and I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars when my original rating was a 5 out of 5 stars, if that tells you anything. I still did enjoy the story, but just not as much as I used to, and I think the most enjoyable part of rereading these for me is truly just being able to see how much I have changed as a person. I just really like analyzing myself. I think that it's really enjoyable. Maybe I'm weird, I don't know, but that's been my favorite part of going through these books, so I can't wait to reread the entire series and see how my opinion has changed overall on the whole thing. But that is it for my January and February wrap up. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. Let me know in the comments down below if you have read any of the books that I mentioned in this video, or what your favorite book was that you've read in the past 2 months. If you'd like to follow me on any of my social media, I am at Clockwork Reads on Twitter and Instagram, and all of my links are in the description box as always. But thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!